Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Rossow. I hold the Wadhwani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Actually, I kind of thought by this point we'd all be doing a lot more of this kind of work in person and these events in person, but COVID seems to continue to have different plans. But it also means that we get to get terrific cross-border connectivity and panelists without having to fly people around the world all the time and take time out of their busy schedules. When I took over this program 8 years ago, one thing that I really wanted to do was to create a unique set of work programs that were focused on Indian states regulation. You know, for me, I first learned about the real importance of Indian states and states' independence about 25 years ago, and it was through the energy lens. As a young staffer at the U.S. India Business Council, one of the first projects that I was shoved into was trying to resolve a series of disputes between American independent power producers and Indian state governments, and really kind of learning in a tangible way in those days that at the end of the day, you know, the central government has a really limited set of tools to initiate a hard action at the state level. States really do control a lot of that space. Today, I think the conversation when we think about states and energy has shifted a bit from those days, from more energy and how do you improve electricity on the grid to what type of energy. And again, progress in shifting that debate often requires critical operational improvements and innovation. Now, the so-called problem of India's federal system in this regard, you know, the inability for these big commitments to necessarily see action automatically on the ground, can also be a feature instead of a bug, providing 28 unique laboratories for ideas for carbon reduction. And today, we got some terrific speakers to explore some of those ideas. Well, I'm very pleased to hand the floor over first to my good friend, Fred Wati. Fred, I'm sure everybody's familiar with, is the CEO of the Network for Global Innovation. I first met Fred about 7 years ago when I was leading an innovation project for the Obama administration here from my perch at CSIS. And as I started to think about and look around for really kind of the leaders in U.S. innovation and those that help to build, you know, the most important ecosystems in the United States, a lot of fingers were pointing at Fred. So we first got to meet each other as Fred was leading the outrageously successful Los Angeles Clean Tank Incubator, which he founded. Focused on local startups, sure, but I remember at that time he was talking to me about building this network of like-minded partners at incubators around the world, because of course, great ideas in carbon reduction shouldn't be limited just to your own borders. So I'm really delighted that my work here at CSIS, as we move into states and energy, I continue to get to live in Fred's orbit a little bit and especially share the stage here. So Fred, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Has it really been 7 years? I'm kind of depressed already here. Praveer, it's good to see you again. Marty, it's nice to see you. Neelima, always good to see you. You know, as Rick mentioned, the Network for Global Innovation, we work with cities, states, regions around the world to help them think through their ecosystems on how to get clean technologies in the market as fast as possible. We probably touch 24 different countries in one way or another around the world. And while we would probably all agree that there's a great deal of diversity in these countries, I think there's as much commonality as well. And whether you, for instance, whether you go to Mumbai or Delhi or Paris or LA, all these major cities, they have the same kinds of challenges: pollution, congestion, not enough affordable housing, not enough jobs that support families. And while we could all, and we must all attack these problems individually, I think there's a lot to be said to share learning and maybe not make the same mistakes that others are making. And so this common sharing of best practices is something that's really important to NGIN. And we love these kinds of discussions because of that. Now, I suppose the same thing could be said for utilities and power grid operators. And while LADWP, which I'm familiar with, of course, and Praveer and Tata are different companies, and they operate in different parts of the world, and their grids are probably different. the similarities are challenges are the same. They don't have a green sheet of paper, a clean sheet of paper to work with. They have to figure out how to get from where we are now to where we need to be in carbon neutrality. And so I think these kinds of discussions, I know they're going to be interesting, and I think we're going to all learn something from that. So I'm very pleased to be part of this. NGIN's pleased to be part of it. And I look forward to the discussion. And I think, Rick, you're back up.
That's right. That's right. Well, we had one hiccup in the schedule. Maharashtra Minister Thackeray was not able to join at the last minute, but that means we can dive right into the technical leads for the program. And this part of the session will be led by my terrific deputy, Neelima Jain. Neelima joined our program a little over 2 years ago after long innings at EESL, doing incredible things like helping lead the Ojala campaign, as well as launching EESL's operations in Europe. So, Neelima, the floor is yours, and can't wait to hear. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Well, the latest IPCC report underscores that India is one of the countries carrying the heaviest burden of the associated climate change effects. And nothing is more illustrative of this fact than the record-breaking early heat waves that India is currently witnessing. Befitting to its local context, the country has set bold targets on climate action and has been punching above its weight as far as the addition of renewable energy capacity is concerned. But more local level action is required to mobilize the national action. And that applies not only to India, but also for any country aiming to tackle the climate change issue. India or US will require the cooperation and leadership of its states to keep its energy transition on track. And the electricity sector in particular is appropriately called the linchpin of efforts to respond to climate change. And so the utilities will increasingly play an important role in delivering not just India's ambitious decarbonization targets, but globally. The reality is, entrenched in state-level political economies, the electricity distribution sector in India continues to impede the implementation of a progressively ambitious climate action at the national level. So what local concerns can be addressed in the near term? And as Rick and Fred noted, the commonalities across the geographies, how can these be leveraged? And how best these subnational entities in US and India can support each other in navigating the challenges of energy transition. To unpack this and more, we have some fantastic panelists with us today, both leading names in the energy and climate change circles across the globe. We have Praveer Sinha, the CEO and Managing Director of Tata Power, India's largest power integrated company, and Marty Adams, General Manager and Chief Engineer at Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, LADWP, the largest municipal water and power utility in the US. So before I dive into the panel discussion, just for the benefit of our listeners, I'm going to hand over to Praveer and to Marty for their opening remarks. But just, if you could talk about a bit of a background about the utilities, their ambition on the energy transition or the carbon neutral nature, and also just about the thermal legacy that the two utilities have had, not just in the context of its history, but also in the context of the geographies itself, and the competing needs of energy security and energy access. So over to Praveer first, and then to Marty.
Thank you, Neelima, and thank you to CSIS Climate Event. It's always a pleasure to be part of the discussions, and when I have my friend Fred inviting me, I have to join this interesting conversation. So thank you, Richard, and good to see Marty in this program. It's actually a phenomenal change that we are seeing globally. And the transitioning that we are seeing and the disruptions that we are seeing global, where from the existing large utilities, large generating plants, large transmission systems, we are getting into the 3 Ds, and the first one is the decentralization. And this is because today you can produce power locally and you can use it locally and distribute it locally. And this is a big change that has happened in last 100 years when Mr. Thomas Alva Edison decided that large generating plants will come up, and that's the only way to produce power and supply power. So I think the big transformation globally that we have seen is the decentralization. We also have seen the big opportunity of decarbonization. We always used to believe that the only way is the thermal power plants or the hydro plants and whatever be the fuel, that was the only way of doing it. But nature gives us so many things, and we did not realize the importance that sun and wind and so many other things in nature is giving us an opportunity to decarbonize. And when we talk of decarbonization, I also feel that decarbonization is not just restricted to supply of electricity, but it plays a much larger role. And especially in mobility, I feel that the decarbonization will play a much more larger role than it would in any other sphere. And the third is, I think, the digital technology, which always used to be outside. And what we have seen is that digital technology is not just telling people that how to use power, but giving them information and two-way information, whereby you are in a much better position to consume power and manage that power. So the energy management system which is there. So electricity is not just unidirectional flow of electrons, but it is now bidirectional because of the decentralization. It also means you have a bidirectional flow of information, and that's the big change globally that we have seen, and that's the exciting phase that we are looking at when we look at the power sector. The second is for a country like India, where we have 1.4 billion people, still the per capita consumption. It is very, very important that we come up with solutions and not go through the traditional path which the rest of the world has gone, and use the technology to leapfrog into newer areas and plan it much better. And I think while traditionally the coal-based and the large generating plants and large transmission systems have been there, can we change that? Can we change the narrative and do more socialization of energy, more democratization of energy than what it has been done? And I think these are some areas that India should work with. In spite of low per capita consumption, it can change the whole way that the energy can be produced and utilized in a country. And these are some of the areas that we are very excited about. When we look at Tata Power and what we are doing, first of all, it's very, very clear that we need to learn and we need to see what's happening globally. The impact of climate is not just restricted to OECD countries or the North America or the Europe or different parts of the world. It's everywhere. It's here and now that we can see the impact. And for a country like India, it's very, very important that we take the corrective step, because we are very vulnerable if climate change of the nature that we are seeing globally happens. And we see that already happening in India, where the temperatures in summer months are going, the monsoons are becoming very, very erratic, and cyclones, which used to be far and few, are happening every year. It's happening on both the east coast of India as well as on the west coast of India, where it never used to happen. So I think the changes which are there, we need to see the writing on the wall. Now, in Tata Power, being a 106-year-old company, it was very natural for us to not only look at many of the things on a larger canvas, but also to demonstrate leadership in thought and action. Incidentally, the first power plant which was set up in 1915 was a hydropower plant, and then subsequently another two came up, and the whole objective at that time of the founder was that he wanted clean, green and abundant energy for meeting the growth aspirations of the people of the country. And I think what was true at that time is true even more today. And we 4 years back took a call that we need to change. We need to do things which are very different. And we said that though the country has not taken a call of, or anyone in the country has taken a call, any utility or any company, we need to take a call and we need to take a hard decision that we will move away from coal-based plants. So we said we will become a net zero carbon company in 2050. We subsequently worked upon it and have improved it, and we said we'll do it in 2045. This is much before the Indian government took a call in COP26 and said that we will become net zero carbon in 2070. So we are nearly 25 years before what the country will become. And I'm very confident that we will not only achieve 2045, but possibly do much better. And possibly this will drive many of the other utilities, many of the other corporates to also take a leaf out of what we are doing. And whenever you do such things, there is a sacrifice, there is a price that you pay for that. There's a certain revenue that you lose, there is certain profitability. But then this is something that we thought is a hard decision and we need to bite the bullet. We also said that we need to enhance our renewable footprint. And while we will grow, we will only grow in the renewable space. And we said that from at that time, we were about 15% of our generation was non-carbon generation, which included renewable and hydro plants. Today, we are 34% of non-carbon, and 2030 will become 80%. So that's the type of targets that we took for ourselves. We'll grow very aggressively, but we will grow in the renewable space and not in the carbon and not in the coal. And we said that over a period of time, as our existing agreements, which are there with the procuring states, once they expire or the useful life is over, will not renew that. So we will, over a period of time, decommission these plants and thereby reduce our carbon footprint. We also thought that if we have to do this, we should not just be working of setting up again large generating stations. Then the whole objective and purpose of decentralization will get defeated. Our objective is to decentralize and empower people. And thereby we said we will play a very, very critical role in driving rooftop solar, not only in large cities, but also in smaller cities. And today we are in more than 100 cities that we are doing rooftop solar. In fact, just today I got the news that 1,000 megawatt, 1 gigawatt of rooftop solar, we have done it in last 4 years. And that's a big number for a country like India. And it just shows that if you go with good solutions, the penetration of these new technologies will happen, because we not only set it up for them, but arrange financing, do the maintenance of these and operate it for them, and provide them many value-added services which helps them and encourages them to take it forward. The second thing that we said, that if we have to also do the decentralization and empower people, it's not only in urban areas, we need to go in the rural areas. Today, we are very big in setting up solar pumps. India has 30 million solar pumps. 30 million pumps. Out of that, 9 million are run on DG sets. Government has an ambitious plan to make it nearly 4 million using solar. We are the biggest one driving this initiative in the country. And we feel that this will not only help the farmer to use energy for their own pump set, but they can also sell water within a certain area of 3 kilometers or 5 kilometer radius. They can also sell the additional energy that is produced to other industries or other economic activities which are being carried out in villages. So that's the second initiative. And the third, of course, is an initiative which is a very ambitious initiative. Normally, corporates will not take it up, but we said as a responsible corporate and as a company which has always worked with communities, we need to reach out to people in the villages. And we run a microgrid program, which is supposed to be the biggest in the world. We want to electrify 10,000 villages, and not only electrify, but also create economic activity around that, whereby people can set up shops, or people can set up dispensaries, grocery stores, set up flour mill, oil expellers, and the microgrid supports them in carrying out these economic activities. So this is in a way promoting more of a rural economy in the country, and that's the other big initiative that we have taken. There are another two initiatives that we are working very closely with. One is of creating the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging. And when we talk of electric vehicle charging, it's not only the home charging, but also for fleet owners. There are a large number of fleet owners who are there. There are a large number of public transport, the bus services for them, and of course the public chargers that we will provide right through the country. You drive anywhere in the country, in the cities, on highways. You travel from the east to north, east to west, or north to south of the country. You will find that every 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers, you have a charging infrastructure where we can charge. So a seamless experience to the people can be provided. We, of course, are a public power utility. We do distribution of electricity. We do the whole set of smart metering and SCADA system to manage and better manage the energy consumption and support in terms of providing energy to the consumers in such a way that they are able to use it. So I will stop over here. I thought let me give you a good glimpse of what all we are doing. But I think some in substances that we are committed, that clean energy is something which is not, we can leave it for tomorrow or day after tomorrow. There is something that we need to do very now and here. We need to be committed about it, and all our actions should talk about it. We can come up with n number of reasons not to do it, but there is only one good reason, and that is that we have only one Earth, only one planet, and we need to protect it and make it good for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks, Praveer. Of course, Tata continues to raise the bar in sustainability, and the 3 Ds that you laid out in the beginning, continues to disrupt the operations of utilities across the world and compels the utilities to be more innovative. So talking about groundbreaking initiatives, the LA 100 study, the multi-year LA 100 study, no match to that. I'm going to request, Marty to give a bit of a background about LADWP, and all the things that it has been doing in transforming LA's power supply, but also just spend a bit more time on this multi-year groundbreaking LA 100 study that has actually laid the foundation for not just LA, but perhaps California and other cities in the US to find a foundation for how multiple pathways could be explored towards a net zero journey. Marty, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's a very early morning in LA, California. So we appreciate being on New York time. So just let me give you a quick introduction to LA Water and Power and what we're about. So we are the largest municipally owned, so city-owned utility in the country, and we've served the city of Los Angeles, and really it is just most of the footprint of the city of Los Angeles with a few outliers. But the city of LA is the second largest city in the U.S., and so it's got a population of about 4 million people, and it is itself one of the biggest economic hubs in the world. I think Southern California, I understand, is the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the world, depending on what's going on with France that day. And the LA region, I think, is in the top 10 or 15 itself. And so, it's a decent sized population, probably a little less than half of New York, but yet it's a huge economic engine. It's actually the hub of manufacturing, believe it or not, in the LA area, the biggest manufacturing region, and also a huge area for technology. Silicon Beach in the LA region is actually bigger than Silicon Valley. And so it's an important place. And of course, all that stuff is powered by electricity. At DWP, so we have a service area of about 475 square miles, roughly, where the 4 million folks reside. Interestingly, looking at the latest numbers, we're about the 14th largest utility in the country of any kind, both public or private. So we do have quite a bit of business. We are a fully vertically integrated utility. So it's interesting in our business when California deregulated the power industry, the public utilities were fortunately left out of that and had their own choices to make. And so we operate our own generation still, our own transmission. We have our own distribution all the way to metering to the customers. So we are from top to bottom, all able to act independently. And so that has given us some distinct advantages in terms of reliability and in terms of flexibility as we move toward the future. It's different for some of my friends in the IOUs, the private companies, where they are part of a California ISO, and so they for the most part no longer own their own generation, so they become more line poles and wires guys and managing transmission and distribution systems. And then in California, there's what they're called CCAs, community choice aggregators, who have actually acted as another third party, or maybe it's fourth party, in between those companies a lot of times and the customers. So there's multiple layers elsewhere in the state, but we still have the old-fashioned model of we generate electricity, we transmit it, we get it to our customers and bill them directly. And that has worked very well for LA. And I will tell you that in times like a couple of summers ago, when there were rolling blackouts in California, LA had no blackouts, no brownouts, no power shortage, and in fact, provided power back to the rest of the state. We originally provided power to Arizona, where the Salt River Project was experiencing huge heat waves. Then the state called, we provided all of LA's power plus 1% of the state's power on top of that, and largely helped stop the rolling blackouts. So, and then folks in the state said, well, how did you do this? And, a lot of it was really by controlling our destiny and by having an overabundance of resources. So in LA, we have built resources originally in the city of LA and then reaching further out. It reached further out, going toward out-of-state coal plants, nuclear plants, hydro energy on the Oregon-Washington border. And so at this point, with the addition of the Red Cloud Wind Project, which is in New Mexico, it just went online early this year. We now get power from 6 different Western states, and we have a tremendous amount of transmission. LA has about 10% of the population of California, but we actually own about 25% of the transmission lines in the state. So the citizens of LA have invested a lot in robust generation and also transmission to get that power to the city of LA. So so that's the background that we're working from. And so when we look at converting to the future, it's very interesting dynamics. Of course, the state of California is very, very forward thinking in terms of renewable energy. I don't think there was a legislative session for a few years where the next session didn't want to outdo the previous session. And so the renewable energy goals, it just kept getting higher and higher and higher, and the deadlines kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And it seemed like I can remember the goals was 50%, 60%, 80%, finally 100%, and the time frame kept changing, and it seemed like nobody could introduce a bill that had to be better than somebody else's. And so somewhere in all that is the practicality of how you actually get this done and how you do this. So then, of course, in LA, our own leaders said, we want to meet the state's goal and actually exceed it. And so in LA, we actually look at accelerating the goals with our current goal being to be 100% carbon free by 2035. And so it's just 10 years ahead of the state goal. It is what President Biden has identified as a goal for the country. I'm not sure it's a hard and fast goal, but it's a target to shoot for. So this is extremely ambitious, going from a company that is, largely been fossil fuel historically. We still run 4 in-basin natural gas plants. Formerly were actually oil burning plants. Now they burn natural gas, and they're in the LA basin and produce about 3,400 megawatts of energy. So it's a substantial amount of power, as well as a large coal plant that we own with other parties. We're the largest off-taker in Utah. And then, as the hydro I mentioned, we have a share in a nuclear plant. And so really a change from this kind of base of energy. So when we were working on it, I will tell you a quick history of how this came about. So originally, what sparked this were 2 particular things. We had a coal plant in Utah at the Intermountain Power Project in Delta, Utah. And the plan was at Delta, Utah, the coal plant was going to hit 30 years in 2027. And there's a question about the future of this plant. And so California began to pass laws against coal generation. And then we had a push to get off of coal early. And so the move came to convert the Intermountain Power Project from coal to natural gas. And to do that, the date got moved up and the target became 2025. And so this was basically rebuild this large coal plant as a natural gas plant. And then I'll get to what happened following that, because it's a big part of where our future goes. The other the law that was going on was one that had to do with once-through cooling, and so that was 3 of our 4 in-basin power plants are on the coast, and they all took ocean water through and cooled it, one pass through and back to the ocean. And so there were not so much issues of warming; there were really issues of impingement and entrainment of sea life. And so on the inlet screens coming into the plants, it was determined that this is impacting sea life and marine life, and so there was a law in California outlawing once-through cooling. And so all 3 of these plants had a deadline by which to convert, and typically they would convert for the most part to air cooling. And so when we moved forward with one of our power plants, that's when everything came to a head. And so it was our Scattergood power plant. We were looking to move forward to repower it with new units. And then the question came, do we want to do that and build a new gas plant? And then at the same time, we got challenged on the new gas plant in Utah. They're going from coal to gas, but now there's a huge move not to go to gas. And so the question for us became, how are we going to replace this, really key large generation facilities with renewable energy, which isn't so much a renewable energy piece, but it's the availability of it in the off-peak, in the peak hours for demand, off-peak hours for sun and wind. And so the storage component became really, really the question. I think if you talk to anybody providing power who has a lot of renewable energies, it's all about storage. And energy storage is the single challenge of having a clean energy future. And so we looked at this. At IPP, we actually had a plan to also convert to hydrogen, so that we'd have a hydrogen blend at IPP, ultimately ideally going to a pure hydrogen plant. That became the cornerstone of a lot of hydrogen projects in the US, and actually I think even has a big influence worldwide. And so the new Intermountain Power Project is groundbreaking actually is going to start in May. Contracts awarded, ready to start construction. And when that plant comes online in 2025, it'll burn about 1/3 clean hydrogen. We call it green hydrogen, which is created by electrolysis with the excess renewable energy. And it'll burn us about 1/3 green hydrogen in 2025. So this is a real-time change in fuels. And I'll talk more about hydrogen later on, but it became a critical point for us. So then we look back in the LA basin and what we're doing in Los Angeles and how we're going to get to this clean energy future. We began a study. It took about 3.5 years. We engaged National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL. It's one of the national labs and in Colorado, and worked with them on the most extensive modeling of a power system that's been done, to our knowledge, certainly the most extensive in the US. And they ran millions of models. and looked at the increase in electric vehicle use, building electrification, where demands would be. It looked at transmission, distribution, and all the challenges we would have in converting, and it set basically a roadmap forward for how we could actually get to a clean energy future. So it wasn't so much the question of can we do this? It really answered the question of how do you make it happen? How do you really do this? And so the LA 100 study was groundbreaking in the extensiveness of the modeling that went on and how thorough it was, and the fact that it pointed a series of pathways that we could get to a clean energy future and actually count on it. And so it identified certainly that we need a number of new generation facilities, about 2,500 megawatts of new renewable energy. Some of that, a good amount of that local in terms of like local rooftop solar. And in LA, there's really no wind to capture. And so it's really, and there's really no space for utility-based solar, ground-mounted solar. So it's really looking at local rooftop solar. It looked extensively at additional major projects like solar or wind projects in the desert. It looked at the needs for additional transmission to get that power into the LA basin. And then it also looked at storage, energy storage, and how much we would need in terms of energy storage to meet demands. And of course, it's easy to say, well, we want to go renewable almost all the time, but let's have our gas backup. But our goal was to get to 100% clean energy, which meant that we would have to have some kind of reserve backup generation, but ideally use it less and less and less, and rely on it less. One of the interesting things about the LA 100 study was that it did validate we still needed in-basin generation. And part of this was to meet the federal energy standards of having reliability when we have a failure on the system. Praveer mentioned typhoons and the change in climate coming up, that they're seeing in India. Interestingly, in California, our biggest threat seems to be wildfire, and it's wildfire. Not so much the whole liability issue that like Edison and PG&E are dealing with in terms of causing a wildfire, but it's wildfire in terms of transmission running through fire-prone areas. We've had modest-sized wildfires just on the perimeter of LA, where we've lost 3 out of 5 transmission lines coming in, and nearly had power outages because of loss of transmission. And it may not be the lines burned down, but it may be the smoke and the soot in the air that causes something to short. And so it really, the study was interesting when looking at it validated you do need local generation. And particularly in light of climate change, when I'd say even 2 months ago in Utah there was a blizzard, and we lost 2 transmission towers and lost one of the important pathways to LA. So we think, well, these things could theoretically happen. I will tell you, they do happen. They have happened. They have happened every single year. We've lost lines, and it's never at the right moment. And the only reason no one in LA knows that we've lost lines is because we have a variety of generation sources and the ability to move that power. And so what the study showed in LA 100 is not only we need more renewable energy, not only need better transmission and connectivity, because what we need to do is be able to move energy throughout the system from every source better than we do currently. Not only do we need more storage, but we also need to retain local generation. So this became a huge challenge for us. So how do we do this? How do we get off gas? How do we go clean and need local generation? So go back to the beginning of the story. Combine that with the fact that we have 3 coastal power plants that no longer can do once through cooling. And those also are transmission hubs. Those are places that for 100 years, the power system has generated power in those locations and branched it out to the city. And so then if you're not familiar with building transmission in California, the lesson is it's impossible. And so it takes, I think 7 years is the fastest anyone's gotten a transmission project through, and that's lightning speed. And that's not in an urban area. I mean, you can imagine building a brand new transmission line, a set of towers through a fully congested city such as Los Angeles. And so, really retaining those transmission paths and those generation centers is important. So when we put these things together, it told us that we also need to be able to generate electricity at our existing sources, maybe a reduced amount or a reduced frequency, but we need to find a new fuel to do it with, and something that we can do it in a clean fashion. And so we took a lesson back to IPP in Utah and said, how does hydrogen play a role here? And so we're now looking also not in Utah, only in Utah, but also in the LA basin as green hydrogen. So that's hydrogen created through electrolysis. So it's created with excess renewable energy and made out of water, as green hydrogen being really the fuel of the future to run in basin generation and also to run other industries in the LA basin. And so that's another effort we have going on now, is to create a green hydrogen hub in the LA basin, both to run power plants, to run parts of our port complex, which is one of the largest and busiest port complexes in the world as well. And certainly 60% of all container traffic goes into the country, goes through ports of Long Beach and San Pedro. And then also run some of those high heat energy using industries that electricity cannot match that amount of heat. They need to burn a fuel to get that kind of heat. And so we're working on this way to actually promote the use of green hydrogen locally, not only for ourselves, but to create an industry here and a hub here to drive that price down, so we'll have a clean burning local fuel. So in the end, if you look at the LA 100 study, it was about 2,500 megawatts of additional renewable energy. I think about 1,000 of that's supposed to be in the LA basin. Recognizing that right now we have about 300 megawatts of rooftop solar in the LA basin, including our feed-in tariff program, and we are the largest solar city in the U.S. So we just got named the 8th out of 9 years the #1 solar city in the U.S. There's a lot of roofs in LA. They can't all accommodate solar panels, but it is something we're going to grow tremendously. We need about a 3-fold increase of what we have now, according to LA 100. But he added storage, renewable energy, then also this firming up the reliability by having local generation, but that local generation has to become clean. So even our 3,000 plus megawatts of in-basin generation, both the coastal units that need to be repowered will be rebuilt with a brand new style of generation, and the plant in the valley that does not need to be rebuilt will also have to be rebuilt. So it's a huge amount of infrastructure investment going to happen. But at the end of the day, we'll have both renewable energy and immediately dispatchable energy, all to meet the demands of the grid and our customers, and to make sure that we maintain our reliability. So the LA 100 has been really important, not only identifying, how do you get to the future. It's identified some projects that no matter what choices you make, these have to happen, but it also underscored the importance of firm, locally dispatchable generation, and that we have to plan for that. And that set us on another path from a technical standpoint, that we need to create a power generating future that doesn't currently exist in the world, but everyone is working toward it. And I think that also then becomes the bridge between how do you have renewable energy created at a time when you often don't need as much, but you can't store it for when you do need it. Looking at this option of a clean fuel gives us that bridge, I think, between the current and the future. So this has been a really interesting issue. We did study a lot on rates and equity. I'll get into that, during the questions. But the other thing that's interesting about the study was that it looks a lot at electrification and how much electrification is going to happen, because when we're building all of this infrastructure, we're looking at a broader electric base. And so that's the other thing about this, that the higher use of EVs, building electrification, because all this infrastructure has to be supported by electrical demand. Otherwise, it becomes unaffordable. So this all goes hand in hand with a shift away from natural gas overall, shift away from fossil fuels, from diesel and gasoline, into higher electric use. So the LA 100 study actually assumes electric use of about 1.5 times or greater than what we've seen historically in LA. So that's a long recap of the LA 100 study and kind of the history of us, but I hope that gives everybody a little bit of framework to go from.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Marty. I mean, see, LA, I think what you've rightly just sort of brought out there is the importance of studies like LA 100 to lay the foundation for a more integrated energy development approach, which is what is required. And I think what stood out for me as well was, that the early retirement of thermal plants across the world is not going to be a simple binary change, from coal or natural gas to RE, but it will take longer, and especially longer for other alternates such as storage to become affordable, because of just the sheer complexity of our energy system. and clearly has enormous financial implications for asset owners and policymakers. But I will come back to several other points that you've laid down on the table. But my question right now is to Praveer. Mumbai recently announced a target to zero out carbon emission by 2050. It is the first city in South Asia to set such a timeline. How has this announcement, changed your approach to energy and emissions in Maharashtra vis-a-vis other states? I think it's just to bring out how the state's support for climate change, renewable energy is changing utilities' approach, overall approach to carbon neutral pathways.
Yeah, Neelima, and it was great to listen to Maki about the LA 100. And let me share with you that when we also discuss about how do we transition from the existing way in which energy is being produced through coal and through nuclear and through gas and also hydro, which has been there, to the new fuels, there has to be a transition, there has to be a time frame, and there has to be a certain amount of financial incentive or support that needs to be done. And I think, but the first thing is that the sensitization of people has to take place. People have to come on board and start admitting that this is that we have to do. Most of the time, we are not able to digest that within our lifetime such a thing will happen. And I think that's what is important for us as a first step. And I would say that Mumbai was the first city which started talking about it. Compliments to Aditya Thackeray, who talked about the Mumbai's climate action plan. He's a young minister, and that's why he can think of something very different than many of us who are today discussing over here, because we have our own mindset, we carry a legacy. But having said that, there is a lot of action that is happening in Mumbai for that. Mumbai started last year something known as people can buy green energy. There was a little higher tariff than the normal tariff. This started about 9 months back. We ourselves were the first one who promoted this, and I have now more than 4,000 of my customers who have shifted. And these are all large commercial customers, banks, multinationals who have said that they are transitioning and they only take 100% renewable energy. And we give them certificate, and also how we give them non-carbon energy to them. And I think that's the first thing that we have done. We also are now promoting electric vehicle in a very, very large way. I shared with you some time back that yesterday only we signed an agreement with all the builders of Mumbai and around area that we will be setting up in next 1 year 5,000 EV chargers in various new apartment complexes and office complexes that will come up. So that's a facilitator. Many a times we hear people are saying that they can't get into EV because there's no charging facility. We ensure that within 3 days to 7 days, the home chargers are put wherever a person buys an electric vehicle, and then the public chargers are there. So and then the facility, the consumer experience through an app which tells them where exactly are the chargers, whether it is occupied or if you want to book them in advance and things like that. So the consumer experience also is equally important. And I think it's a question of creating the opportunity and the facility. We are now working on large number of projects where especially our commercial consumers and industrial consumers are talking of 24/7. So I give them a hybrid solution of solar during the wind time, during the daytime, evening and night time. I give them wind energy, and the balance I give them is through hydro or through storage solutions. And I also give them a package solutions of demand response, whereby they are able to manage their load in such a way that maximum demand is during the peak time of generating from the renewable sources. So there are a whole lot of solutions that have to come. They need to be integrated. We need to look at many new technologies which are coming. We have to push the pedal on hydrogen. We need to push the pedal on not only the lithium-ion batteries, but also various other chemistries which are there. And many of these are batteries, flow batteries and others, which have unique properties, and we can use them for stationary applications. So I think one thing that I have always seen is necessity is the mother of invention. Last decade, I think everyone in the US thought that shale gas is the panacea and the solution for a long time to come. And I have personally seen that how many of the research work that was going on in hydrogen and also in storage batteries got delayed because everyone thought that when you have shale gas available in abundance and at such low cost, why look for something as a replacement for that? And that's a missed decade for all of us. I think in this decade, we need to find solutions, and we need to come up with various proposals which will help us to move towards the transitioning of from the traditional generation to the new generation. And this has to happen much faster than what we have done in the previous decades.
Praveer, I think you've already found solutions to bigger problems. Many states are witnessing a significant rise in sales migration of large commercial consumers, and you seem to have already found that solution. Hopefully, other utilities will be able to replicate it too. My next question really is to Marty. Marty, you mentioned, briefly on different ownership structures and how that's possibly influencing the decisions. So I always wonder how does a public utility gets incentivized in decarbonizing the grid? Any learnings that you've had so far, and anything that we can possibly apply back in India, given that at least 98% of the utilities are state-owned?
So it's an interesting issue because you'd think, why is a public utility trying to be so forward-thinking? It's funny, when we looked at it and looked at it with some of my colleagues across the country, it turns out that the public utilities are actually leading the way on a lot of innovation. And I think part of it is it's not that we're not paid to be risk averse, but I think we're very sensitive to the political goals and the social goals, and not married to worried about the profit margin. So that definitely changes the incentive. And so it's, one of the things that I think happened with us is that we had to come to grips with the fact that even though we were worried about cost, we were fully resourced. And so anything we're changing we're not filling a gap. We're basically adding on to what we already have. And so, you're looking at moving from one workable set of resources to a new set of resources. And so everything is additional cost. And so one of the things that comes to grips, we're always trying to keep the cost down, trying to make sure power is affordable. We actually have some of the lowest power rates in the state. And so that's been a very good thing. But we have to listen to the public. The public says, I want clean energy. I want a renewable energy future. And so it's not just politically driven by the state and the assembly and by our own politicians locally in LA, but it's driven by the public. And so I think that it's very interesting because, we sometimes from a utility standpoint, we think we're protecting the public, and we think we're gonna keep the cost down. We're gonna do what they want, but they said, no, I want a cleaner neighborhood. I want a cleaner environment. I'm worried about my children, my grandchildren, and the air quality. And so it's important to listen. And as a public agency, you're able to listen and able to appreciate that. And so what happens is that we know that there's going to be cost increases in what we do, because we're going to have to make massive investments. But that is balanced against the public will to do something different than what we've done historically. And so one of the key things in the LA 100 studies that we did have a public group. We had a very large community group, dozens of people who went through this process hand in hand with us, and they saw the results as the results came out. They understood what was going on. And some people asked the question, what's this going to do to my power rates? How is this going to be affordable? How fast do we need to get there? And so the public engagement was huge in this aspect, and became a critical piece of helping us understand that our customers want us to go in this direction. It's not like we're picking a path and dragging them along. It's more that they're pushing us to the future that they want to have, that they want to see. And so I think this becomes a really good example of the public being engaged with the utility that they own to help drive the direction. An interesting piece of public involvement is coming up now with what we call the LA 100 equity study. And so interesting about this whole issue, and I think Praveer's going to probably have this occurring in his utility as well, and we're seeing it across California, is the question, who's going to be paying the rates for the future? And so one of the things that came about in the LA 100 study, we looked at rooftop solar, what's going on. And, there are some people who are, well, I'm going to say crusaders, probably wrong, but some people who are true believers and they want to save the universe, right? And save the planet, I guess, save the planet. But a lot of people want to zero out their electric bills. Bottom line, they want to zero out their electric bills and make themselves immune to increases in the future. But we need massive investments in infrastructure, not just new energy sources, but also we need to redo our electric distribution grid, because it has to be able to handle more chargers on the grid. We have to redo transmission. And as people zero out their bills, then we lose that investment. And the investment in the future goes to a smaller group of people. So we've already seen about $150 million a year shift from people who don't have rooftop solar onto everybody else. And so it's, imagine that. So you get about 4 to 6% of customers who are part of folks who originally may have gotten rebates for rolling out, solar and that sort of thing, and they pretty much zero out their bill, that are not contributing. And so what we've analyzed is that as we move forward, if we don't change the model, because right now, if someone generates electricity, they use it, we pay for the excess, but we don't pay the price of what it's worth at the time. And this is a huge issue. It's an issue with the solar lobby, and they're trying to fight this in the state with the IOUs right now. Is that when you pay someone full price for electricity when there's already a glut of electricity on the system, and then at night when everything's charging and the refrigerator's running and everything, nobody pays anything as in terms of a net bill, then who's paying for that? And we estimate that if we don't change the way we look at this, there'll be $1 billion a year of shift between folks who have the ability to get off the grid to folks who don't have the ability. And take an area like LA, where 60% of our population does not own their roof. They don't own the building they live in. They're either in multifamily housing or they're in housing that they lease or rent. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. So part of the LA 100 study not only showed the public wants to participate, but they want a fair distribution of how the costs are going to hit in the future. And so, if you're connected to the grid, somehow you have to contribute to the grid, because that's where we're going to be spending a lot of money. And so there's this current study going on right now. It's going to last about a year, called the LA 100 equity study, really to look at how we get in the future without putting all the costs on the underserved communities who, could not afford this kind of investment by themselves. So it's an interesting challenge. We're being a little more vocal about it. Everyone's facing it right now. And you see it throughout California, is that how does everybody pay their share for the future? So again, the public will be extremely involved. And LA study hopefully will influence other things, including the ability of the IOUs. Otherwise, you'll see people who don't want to have a power bill, but they want to have reliable energy. And, in my mind, you can have microgrid, you can do whatever you want, reliable energy, battery storage, everything you want to have. But at the end of the day, if you can't disconnect that wire, then they're still dependent on the power company. And the power company is obligated, not only us, but everybody in California is obligated to guarantee there's power all the time. And that we match all those scenarios. And so the question becomes, how do you get that level of reliability and the level of investment needed to maintain that, and at the same time be fair to all of the public? So this is a big challenge, but for us, this is something you might not see as a private company, because you're worried about the bottom line, you're worried about about your shareholders. In this case, our shareholders are the people of Los Angeles, and we want to follow what they want us to do, and we need to do it also in a way that is equitable to everybody, to pay into the system. Otherwise, it becomes unaffordable. And so it's a big challenge, but great opportunities as well.
Great. And I'm going to let the private company also respond to that. Do you see, Praveer, do you see parallels here in the incentives given your corporate structure or ownership structure, and also overlaps between the incentives that Marty just laid out?
Absolutely right. It is now the cross subsidy, which we call in the Indian system, is inverted. So it is now the rich who end up getting the cross subsidy, or the people who can afford it, rather than the people for whom it is. So what it needs is that it's not only a question of the change in the way energy is produced and supplied and the transformation that is happening, but also there is a need to change the regulatory mechanism in terms of the tariff fixation. And we need to do it in such a way so that the benefit of the subsidy or the low cost goes to the lifeline consumers and not to the others. And to that extent, the policy of netting of energy or grossing of energy and things like that. So all these things have a sunset period. These are not things which are there for perpetuity. It was initially thought that to help penetration of rooftop solar, this will be given. But there should have been a transition. There should have been a sunset. And there has to be a tariff mechanism which will protect the interest of the lifeline consumers and not penalize, but moderate or balance what is being provided to people who generate their own rooftop solar energy. So I think it requires a change not only at the technology stage or the utility scale, but also in terms of the planners, policies, and the regulators. And all of them have to think a little differently when we do the transition.
Sure. And here's I'm also watchful of the time, but here is a question for both of you. Do you see a value in public and private utilities forming partnerships just to accelerate the decarbonization? And if you do, what are your top 3 recommendations? And especially, drawing from your experience of the trade-offs that you're facing in the journey of decarbonization.
Let me try to address this, Neelima. I run public-private partnerships, whether it is in
exactly.
or in Visa. Now, whether it is a private company or a public company, the service that is being provided is a public service. Electricity is not a commodity which you can do gaming on or speculation. This is not a thing, because this is something which is used by everyone, rich and the poor, people in downtown area and people staying in suburbs. So this is going to be a regulated business. There has to be an oversight to ensure that there is fairness and transparency in the way energy is priced and serviced and supplied to people. The need for everyone is same. You cannot have differentiated needs. And so it's very important that even if it is a private company, it works as a public utility and public service. Secondly, my personal experience has been that it can be a great win-win if both of them come together, because at the end of the day, this is impacting every citizen in a city, in a state, in a country. And best results will only come if there is a public-private partnership and both of them collaborate and work, especially when we have such a huge and humongous task in front of us for the transitioning. So it will be great if people can collaborate and work with rather than working on cross purpose.
Marty?
I'd love to chime in. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. One of the interesting things that happens, I think, is, we look at competition and being in competition. In California, everyone has a service territory. So we're in competition to say my rates are cheaper than his rates, but something like that, but honestly, it's not like we can take over each other's service area, at least not the way we're currently set up. And so, so I think, the thought of sharing a secret or not working together, there's no disadvantage to working together. And so, I see that there's some real important opportunities that we can't afford to miss. One, of course, I mentioned hydrogen as a alternative fuel, and I think that for something like that to work and to replace natural gas, it's got to be scalable and the cost has to drop down. I mean, look what happened with solar panels. Solar panels were hugely expensive. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars subsidizing rooftop solar. Now it stands on its own 2 feet. There's no subsidies, and utility scale solar out in the open space, like in the high desert, is the cheapest energy we have. And so we need to drive a new fuel that direction, and we're not going to do it by ourselves, and public agencies can't do it by themselves. But I think together as an industry, we can do that. And so I do think that that's something that as an industry, we need to drive the future together that we want to see, to bridge that storage gap between renewable energy generation and actual time of energy use. The other thing I think is important is how we integrate renewable energy. Praveer talked about microgrids and looking at your chargers and all the apps for where your chargers are available, this and that. We're looking at also we're part of a pilot of pushing energy from cars back into the grid at certain times of day. All this is very technical, and we're gonna, the electric industry is going to become a huge tech industry. I know a gentleman that says we used to use electricity to push ones and zeros. Now we're going to use ones and zeros to push electricity. And so I think that the intellectual piece, what's going to happen with how we integrate all the renewables. I grew up in a water world, and in the water world, when the pressure was up, the tank filled. Pressure was down, the tank would drain, and the battery. It is a big battery just floated on the system. But everybody tells me an actual battery doesn't work that way, and it's like, well, how in the world? It's like voltage high, voltage low, and you got to make the battery flow in, you got to make the battery flow out, and so. So it's going to take a lot more technical understanding, programming, and that sort of thing, especially as we have more distributed energy resources. I mean, just integrating all the rooftop solar, integrating the feed-in tariff, projects we have that are kind of like mini, they're way bigger than a roof, smaller than industrial scale. Those are all challenges, and as we add more, they become more and more bigger challenges. And then balancing all renewable energy, the cloud cover comes over, and all of a sudden. We lose hundreds of megawatts of renewable generation, and it's got to be made up from something. Just the inconsistency in wind generation. So it's going to be much more difficult to work with Mother Nature and climate and weather changes all through the day across a broad region than is just turning a power plant on and knowing what's going to happen. And so I think that the integration piece is extremely important, and I think that no one can afford to do it alone. That we need to integrate across the industry. Certainly, a lot of utilities are very forward thinking in this and how to integrate the renewables, and I think that's a huge thing. One last thing in California that I think is really important, and it's we'll put it this: it's important in the United States, and I don't know if everybody else has experienced this, and this is workforce. So one of the things that we see right now is that there is a huge shortage of workers in the electrical industry, particularly line workers, underground conduit workers, and electrical mechanics. That's what we call electrical mechanics. But folks that are hooking up the batteries and the transformers and all the big parts and pieces. And what we see in California is just the costs go up and up and up because people are just basically hiring folks away from each other. Because there's a shortage of folks in the industry, and then PG&E decides to underground their whole system, and they suck all the workers up to Northern California, and even Edison can't afford to keep them. So who pays a lot more than we do. And so, we are in a situation where we are looking for a future that's going to cause a huge amount of work to be done. And that work is, at some point in the day, you're going to build transmission, you're going to hook things up, and people have to do that. And we're looking at an area where there is not enough skilled workforce. And it's a national issue in the United States. And I think that I've talked to my friends at Edison, who's our next door neighbor and feeds a lot of areas around us. And I said, it does me no good to create workforce for then you to hire them away. I said, this has to be done in collaboration on a regional scale. And frankly, it should be done in collaboration on a statewide scale or larger. And I think that this is where public and private have got to get out of the who's going to pay the guy the most to come and go back and forth, including with contractors. And I think we need to partner together to create the workforce. Otherwise, none of us are going to get to where we need to be, because between real work that needs to be done for the future, mitigating wildfire risk in California, all these things that are planned to happen, they're going to require people. And right now, we're all asking for the same group of people. And so none of us are going to get to where we want to go. And all we're going to see is a huge increase in costs in the process of moving forward if we don't work together across the board, public and private, to create the workforce to get us there. So that's, I think, a huge missing link that's not really seen until you really drill down and try to get the work done.
Great. I know Praveer now has to log out. So I'm going to just ask Praveer for his concluding thoughts and just the need, as Marty mentioned, need to work together. Are there any concrete areas where you think US and Indian utilities could work together?
I think in all the areas in US and Indian utilities can work. I was part of an association which was known as Global Intelligent Utility Network Coalition. There were 4 utilities from US that we worked with, which was at that time PEPCO, and then Encore, SDG, and I think it was Duke Energy at that time. Its name is changed now. So there is a huge amount of learning. Issues are the same, whether we talk of manufacturing or research work in solar or in batteries or in hydrogen, or it is in the practices, the smart grid technologies, demand response, EV charging, what happens to the grid, what is on the forecasting of energy requirements. So there are a whole lot of areas that we can work together. And I think it's a great opportunity for exchange of ideas, exchange of people, so that they understand each other and understand also the way and the practices and processes are being followed. It is also important that the regulators also interact with each other so that they understand what are the challenges which are there and how they are being addressed. Like California was the first one which went to a large scale on net metering for rooftop solar. And I think what was their learning, what was some of the mistakes that they did and how it can be taken care. So there are a whole lot of areas that we can all work together. There needs to be much more platforms and much more coordination and cooperation between the utilities. And I would be quite excited to be part of that.
Okay, so I can already see possibly follow-up conversations between Tata and LADWP on a public-private partnership, and possibly the global partnership on just net zero. Thank you so much, Praveer. Marty.
I need to log out, so thank you very much once again to everyone. Thanks, Fred, Marty, and
thanks, Praveer.
And look to catch up again with you.
Thanks,
Thank you, and thanks, Neelima.
Thank you. Marty, your concluding thoughts and areas where you think Indian utilities and the US utilities could work together on, or any templates that or for policy or practice that could be exchanged.
Well, I think Praveer hit one really important point, particularly was regulatory issues. It's easy to pass a law or regulation. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to actually implement it. And I think this is one of the areas that if we're going to really save not just the region here, but work on really saving the world from the climate, we need to find a way to do it together that makes sense. And so I think the idea of common goals, common ways to get there, maybe common milestones would go a long way. And I know there's been some international efforts at doing that sort of thing, but there's not consistent buy-in. But I think that there could be some commonalities that are really that could put everyone on the same trajectory, which I think is probably an important thing, because it'll do no good for one part of the world to be perfectly clean and everything around it to not be clean. And so I think that finding a path forward that people can agree on, that gets us there. Some places may be faster than others, but I think it's important. The air we're saving. There's local pollutants and there's global pollutants, and what we're really talking about is global pollutants, and people forget that. And that, so we need to really look at it that way and think of how we leverage this together collectively as an international industry, each serving our area, how we can get there together. I think also that, I'm always impressed with India's technology and ability to grab technology, create applications, look at things that are customer interface. And I think there's a lot for us to learn, and a lot that we can learn from experience. Sometimes folks are able to go from maybe something that was a little behind the times to something that's way ahead of the time. And there may be some of us in the middle that are kind of going, we're kind of in the middle, but we're kind of moving slowly to the future. And so I think, you can say we go from coal to clean. We've got some steps in between, but the steps sometimes it causes kind of slower progression. And so much as we're trying to drive the future as quickly as possible, we're like, well, we kind of already got partway there. And, so what do we have to go back on? So, we don't have a lot of coal plants we're relying on. It'd be different if we did, because we just say we don't want that and would leap to the future. So I think internationally, even parts of the United States where there's still a lot of coal generation, I think there's this concept of, if we're going to take a step to the future, who's gotten there already? Who's figured it out? Who's figured out how to integrate, with electric vehicles and customers and batteries and done that? And I think we're always looking for the latest, greatest, because it's the evolving area. The technology is evolving quickly. The software is evolving quickly. And I think that what we always want to do is to find out who's at the front of the game. It's almost like when automatic metering came in, so remote metering, and you saw the early versions, and then they became obsolete, and there were new versions. And I think we're all at the bleeding edge of the future, but we want to find the things that are working and not repeat the mistakes of the past. We want to learn from them, and at the same time, we have to keep the lights on all the time, and we are bound by law to be reliable. And so we can't forget that. So, which I think it makes the collaboration together that much more important, because what's at risk of failure is huge, and we can't afford to fail. At the same time, we have a mission to move this industry forward. So I think there's a lot of room for collaboration, and I really look forward to that in the future.
Great. Rick, Fred, your concluding thoughts very quickly. Well,
not only did I learn something in this, I'm actually more optimistic about the future. And it's amazing how these two companies are leaders in their own respective worlds, other sides of the world, but there's a lot of commonality there too. So Marty, I want to thank you very much for participating in this, and Rick and Neelima for organizing it. It's been terrific.
Rick?
Connecting aspirations and actions. A lot of these conversations do focus on aspirations, but these kind of conversations help us understand the sort of actions that are required to get us to the future that I think we can all imagine. So, again, I got nothing smarter to say than our experts. So let me just shut up and let everybody get back to their day and digest all this terrific material that I think that our experts shared. So thanks to my friends for being here, and thanks to Neelima for leading the charge.
Great. Well, all I'll say is states are a great place to start. Utilities are too. So I cannot thank you enough for all your rich insights, and I hope to see you all in future conversations. And thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much.